Hello there guys, Francis Gray here, and in today's video we're going to be finishing off the diorama to Tim Curry's Pennywise from the TV movie adaptation of Stephen King's It. I'll see you after this. Okay guys, so if you haven't seen part 1, there'll be a link to that in the description bar below, but basically in a nutshell we took a statue made by Diamond Select Toys, we took it apart, we 3D printed new various parts, painted it all up, put it back together, and we scratch built 6 brand new balloons, and we put them on some floral pattern wire to make it nice and taut. And and we added some red felt to his hair. So there was a lot to break down in that video. So if you haven't seen part 1, I strongly suggest that you backtrack and watch part 1 first. But if you've already seen it or you're not that bothered about it, then sit back and enjoy, because in this video we're going to be building the diorama to this. So instead of me waffling on, let's get straight into the build. Okay guys, so the first thing we need to do is we need to make the wooden base. So obviously you need to start with buying some wood, and then I took it into the garden and I cut it up and I got a nice rounder bit, and then I just took my time, routed all the edges, and then we've got like a nice L-shaped bracket base to build up upon. Okay guys, so for the next stage I went ahead and I painted this in matte black with just regular black acrylic. Just took my time, got into all the little nooks and crannies, all the surfaces, and then at the end of it we've got a nice all-round black frame. So after that paint was left to dry, for the next stage I went in with some PVA glue, mushed it around with my finger, made sure I got into all the corners, and then we added a nice bit of red felt to the bottom of the base. So the scene that we're going to go ahead and try and recreate is the famous scene where Pennywise shows up for the first time. I believe it's to the character Ben, and we see him stood on the murky water lake, and we have all the lily pads around him, and then we have in the background the old entrance to the old sewage works, and then we have a load of greenery around the side, and then a load of these like cistern things sticking out the floor. So in this video we're going to go ahead and we're going to try and recreate all those aspects. Okay, so for the next stage we need to go ahead and we need to recreate that sewer / abandoned building in the background, but as you can see there, it's at a certain angle from Pennywise, so that's going to make life a little bit more difficult. But with some persistence in matter control, I eventually made a 3D sculpture of the same building. So it mightn't be 100%, but it's pretty much like 90%. So it's good enough for me. So what I ended up doing was I ended up skewering it to a certain angle, so it's pointing to the right, and then once that's printed, then that should make it look like it's a 3D building but from an angle like it is in the movie. So that's the principle anyway. Okay, so now that we've got the file, let's go ahead and print it.
5 hours later.
Okay guys, so that seems to have printed off rather well. So for the next stage I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my time and I'm going to clean all this up. Okay guys, so the window part and the little bridge on the bottom, or the little fence on the bottom, even though they printed okay, it was just way too much more work to cut out all the brim of the filament. So I thought it would be easier to just remove it all now, and then print those parts off separate and then add them later on as a separate part. So it's made things a little bit more fiddly, but it should work out better in the long run. Okay guys, so now that this is looking a lot more cleaner, for the next stage I'm going to go ahead and give this a light coat of grey primer, just so it shows up any imperfections. Okay, so I went ahead and I recreated those missing parts. So we've got the fence that goes on the bottom of the first bridge, and then we've got the overlapping broken window that goes at the top. So yeah, it is a little bit fiddly, but it has been made to measure, so it should fit in rather snug. I just got to make sure that I don't accidentally break any of the ends or anything like that. Okay, so after a second coat of grey primer, just so everything looks like it's all one shade, for the next stage I'm going to go in and we're going to add some highlights and some dark tones, and we're going to start making this look like the scene from the film. Okay, so now that that is dried, for the next stage I'm going to go in with some medium green watercolour, and I'm just going to basically use this as a stain or a stainage just to make it look like it's more aged and decrepit. So now I'm just going to go in with just some regular silver, and I'm going to go in and just add a few little bits to make the metal parts look like they're rusted and aged. Okay guys, so in order to recreate the broken glass, I'm just going to use some of this see-through plastic, and I'm just going to attach it to the back, and then we're going to map out where the areas are, and then we're going to take our time and cut away, and then when we go to add it again, in theory it should look like all the little panes of broken glass like we see in the movie scene. Okay guys, that seems to have worked fantastic. So for the next stage I'm going to use some regular masking tape and we're going to stick it in place. Okay, so now that we've got our sewage building all painted up, for the next stage we need to go ahead and add it to the diorama. So I mapped out where it needs to go, which is basically the upper top right hand corner, and then took my time with a sharp scalpel and then made a basic outline of the building, so it'll be easier for me to just add glue in the areas that I need. And yeah, just went in with just regular PVA glue, and then I just weighed it down with some paints and then left to dry.
The next morning.
So now that that's nicely glued in place, for the next stage we're going to have to start creating the foliage that goes around and behind it. So in order for the modelling clay to stick to it, I'm just going to go in with a sharp scalpel and I'm going to add some zigzag X marks, and then basically this just gives the clay something to hold on to later. So once all that is done, for the next stage I'm going to go in with this stuff, which is Das air drying modelling clay, and it just basically is what it says it is. It's just air drying modelling clay. So just put it on in thin strips, and then go in with a toothbrush and then map it all out. That gives it a rough like bush tree texture, and then just leave it to dry. Now this will slightly shrink because air drying modern clay just does that, but we can go in and we can work around the imperfections at a later date. So while we wait for the air drying modelling clay to fully dry, I went into the garage and I got some scrap wood, and I just cut off some pre-measured wood that should work as like a foreground ledge. So I'm just going to go in with some PVA glue and then just add it in like a zigzag section, make sure it gets into all nooks and crannies, and then I'm going to put the wood in place, and then we're just going to leave that to dry.
3 hours later.
So for the next thing, I went in with some regular white wood filler, and I took my time and I just put it on the edges of the chipboard. This basically just, when it hardens and I smooth it down, it'll make it look more like smooth rather than obviously the bumpy, grainy wood texture. So it just goes a long way to blending in the scene. Now I'm only going to go ahead and do the sides. I'm not going to do the top, because the top we're going to be needing that to be a rough texture in a moment. So for now it's just going to be the sides.
24 hours later.
Okay, so now that the air dry modelling clay has had a good few hours to fully dry, for the next stage I'm going to go in with some matte black acrylic paint, and I'm just going to take my time and get into all the nooks and crannies, and then this will go a long way to add as a base tone to the forest. And now I'm going to go in with a medium green acrylic, and I'm going to add like a general dry brush to add some highlights to mimic some bushes. Not so far back that in the dark, but they are casting a little bit of shadow. And now in with a little touch up of black again, just to add a little bit of like dark recesses. And then we can go in with a vibrant green to bring out some of the foreground. So for the next part, I want to go ahead and add some kind of 3D aspect to the trees and the bushes. So I'm going to go in with some of this stuff, which is this like scenic scatter that's usually used on model railways, but they come in handy for dioramas such as this. And just basically go in there with some PVA glue, apply it where you want it, and then just give a generous scatter over the top, leave it a good few hours to dry, and then shake off the excess when you're done. Okay, so there's no point in any waste, so go in with like a makeup brush, wipe away any loose parts, and then put them on a mat, and then make sure they go back in the jar, ready for it to be used another day.
Yeah, baby, yeah!
Okay, so now that the remaining parts are nicely glued in place, for the next part I'm going to go in with a very vibrant green, and I'm going to add a general dry brush highlight just to some of the leaves, just to make it look like the more vibrant and the sun's hitting that part of the forest, and just gives a nice contrast between light and dark. So for the next part I'm going to go in with some of this stuff, which is just like fake grass that you can buy in tufts. You usually get them in DIY stores. It's like test samples. And yeah, just basically just going to cut it to shape, and then just add some PVA glue again, stick it to the raised ledge. This is why we didn't want to add wood filler to the top part, because we wanted that nice wood grain to hold the glue, so to make this nice and secure. So before I go ahead and add this, I'm just going to add a bit of PVA glue to the back, and I'm just going to cut some various bits of the grass out, stick it in place, and then this is just going to make a bit of a backdrop before we go ahead and add a proper part of the tuff. So you'll see what I mean.
What?
So before we go ahead and add the grass tufts in place, I want to go ahead with the same matte black that we used before to paint that bit of chipboard wood, which is going to be used as like a 3D foreground in comparison to the background. So just taking me time again, and just now that the sides have been smoothed, just give it a good coat, leave it dry, and then it looks like it's part of the base. Okay, so now that that's dry, for the next stage I'm going to go in with some more of that fake grass. I'm going to cut it to shape, and then I'm going to apply some PVA glue in place, leave it to dry, and then bing bang bosh, you got a nice middle foreground. Okay guys, so the next thing we need to create is we need to create this cistern thing that's poking out of the ground. So I'm not too sure what its function is in real life, but it is seen in the film like letting smoke out, so maybe to relieve pressure or gases or something. But yeah, so it's there in the film, so it's going to be there in the diorama. So so let's go into matter control. So after about 10-15 minutes worth of work, I managed to create this, which is basically the same shape as this cistern thing. And I know the base is a little bit longer because we only see the top part poking out in the film, but this is going to be modelled over later on. So now that we've created it, let's get printing. Okay guys, so now that that's printed, I'm going to go in with this stuff, which is UV resin, and I'm basically just going to paint it over the surface, and then I'm going to put it into the curing machine, and then leave it a good probably 5 or 6 minutes to fully cure, and then we can start adding the nuts and bolts.
5 minutes later.
Okay guys, so for the next part I went in with some of this stuff, which is little diamond beads. And then these work really good for miniature like rivets and nuts and bolts, etc. So just took me time with some just regular plastic styrene glue made by Revell, and then just stuck them in place, leave them to dry, and yeah, for the next stage we can take it to the garage and we can give it a quick prime.
A few moments later.
Okay guys, so after a quick prime of grey, and then we went in with a base coat of silver. Once all that was left to dry, for the next section I'm going to go in with some surface primer from Vallejo, and basically this is a really good colour to add like a rust effect to metal. So just going to cake it on there, thin it all out, and then we can go in with a paper towel and we can gently wipe away or dab away the excess. For the next stage I'm going to go in with some black watercolour, and I'm just going to gently go over the top, and then this is going to add shading to one side of the cistern, basically just to make it look like the sun's hitting the other side and one side's brighter than the other. Okay, same again, black watercolour, but this time going in with a detailing brush, and I'm just going to get into all the nooks and crannies, and then I'm going to add some kind of water stainage under all the little rivets, basically get across that this piece of metal has been left in this murky water for a very long time. And now I'm going to go in with some natural silver, and I'm just going to add a highlight to the nuts and bolts, and then a little bit to the lighter side of the cistern. So it just goes a long way to adding detail. So for the next part, I'm going to go in with some of this stuff, which again is another like test sheet that you can get from DIY stores, and it kind of, this part here is to mimic from the land leading up to the stream where Pennywise is. Now this is going to be a bit difficult to model because we are trying to do a flat surface over like a 90-degree angle, so it's going to be a little bit tricky to get that just right. So with trial and error, hopefully we can get there. So yeah, so just going to cut it to size, and then same again, PVA, glue it into place, leave it to dry for a good few hours. And the idea is, because these are smaller than what the lily pads will be in the foreground, with a little bit more work, they should translate nicely to the same style lily pads, but further back in the lake, leading up to the old sewage building or works. So that's the plan anyway. If it works or not is a different matter. So yeah, so I went ahead and pre-cut where the cistern goes, so when we go ahead and leave that to dry, then in theory that should be nicely in place and we can build up around it.
6 hours later.
Okay, so now that is glued very nicely in place, for the next stage I'm going to go in with a few off-cut parts that was left over, basically just to try and make it look a little bit more 3D. So there's going to be like another step forward. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little tuft to the back part there to mimic that the lily pads have drifted into where the sewage area is as well. And we're going to go ahead and then add like a front lisp under the cistern, and then there's going to be an extra part that goes over the system, because in the TV series we see that there's only the top part that's poking out, not the rest of it. So we need to go ahead and basically blend over that.
346 minutes later.
Okay, so now that that's dried, for the next stage I'm going to go in with some of these fake trees, and they're made by a company called Fairyland. So there's a couple of novelty shops near where I live that sells these like little like things to go with like make believe fairy environments. But one of the things that they sell is these cheap little fake trees. So these will work fantastic. So I don't need it to be fully 3D or 360 degrees of the bush, because it's obviously going to go onto a 2D backdrop. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these in half, which will make them flatter, easier to glue, and then the other part that we've just cut off, that's going to be extra bushes to add later. So basically it's more bang for your buck. So I end up doing this to 3 trees. Okay guys, so for the next stage, now this is okay, but it's not perfect. It looks a bit flat. So all this area here is supposed to be lily pads that are like further off into the distance. But as you can see at the moment, it looks more like a privet hedge. So I've over the years I saved up some little plastic plants, and these are what they look like individually. So the idea is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some PVA glue on a pallet, and I'm just going to dip these in, and I'm going to push them in place, and then hopefully we can make this look a little bit more 3D.
No exposure, I just wanna be a loner. Some can't stay sober, looking over all their shoulders, like moving boulders just to
okay, this is going to take forever. Oh my goodness, that took a long time to do. Right, seeing as I've still got some PVA out, for the next stage I'm going to go in with some of this scenic lichen, and I'm going to add some more detail to this top part here.
thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I've been feeling weird, I can't seem to focus good enough, nothing's really could be a little tough. I just need to feel like the end's in sight for me. But let's be really real, anxiety can foggy all this stuff I've been feeling weird.
Okay, so after leaving all that to dry overnight, for the next stage I'm going to go in with some watered down PVA glue, and I'm going to give it a good square into all the little areas, all the nooks and crannies, and then make sure that this is really secured in place.
Oh God, no luck. Everything feels like you're sticky stuck. I'm lost, handcuffed to the bed where I sleep. Don't give a f. Can't stop, unplug. Feeling overwhelmed, I think I've had enough.
Okay guys, so now that we know that none of those plants are going to go anywhere, for the next stage I put on my best latex rubber gloves and I decided to mix myself some clear resin. So this comes in two parts, part A, part B, and I believe it's for every 100 parts of A, you have to add 50 parts of B. So a little bit of maths there for you. And because we want to make this like a murky water, we don't want it to be crystal clear, I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of drops of this stuff, which is this like yellow dye, which is specifically made to mix into a clear resin. So so just going to apply it, take a long stirring stick, and then get into all the surfaces. Make sure that you don't leave any areas unmixed. Give it a good probably like 5, maybe even 10 minutes mixing time. Then just go ahead and pour it into wherever you need it to pour. So I've gone ahead off camera and made sure that this is really secure and there's not much chance of any leaks. But even the best of intentions can still fail. So all we have to do is just cross our fingers and just hope that the resin doesn't leak out the sides. So after a quick once up and down with the wooden stick just to free up any air bubbles, for the next stage I'm going to go in and add a protective tub over the top, and this should help the resin cure but not have any impurities fall in place like dust or sawdust or anything like that.
3 days later.
Okay guys, so after giving it a good few days to fully cure, I decided to demold this bad boy. So as you can see there, plenty of vices keeping this in place, and I'm glad to say that it was only a tiny little leak, which you can probably see just right there. So that was a huge worry off my mind. So now, just going to take all these clamps away, and then hopefully this will demold without any breaks on the resin. Okay guys, I'm extremely thankful to say that it demolded with no major cracks or any breaks, so I'm thankful for that. Okay, so now it's Operation Cleanup. Okay guys, so here it is all cleaned up, and still need to do a little bit more repainting because there was a few imperfections back here, and this part here where I had to put some blue tack, it didn't obviously dry the resin in a nice 90-degree straight line. It was a bit bumpy, so it took me a long time to get rid of all that blue tack and get it all back out there. So thankfully it's done. Now I do have a little bit of an imperfection here. I don't know if that's showing up on the camera, but it delves in and out. So I might try to fix that in a moment. And the only other part was the this back bit here chipped off when I was breaking the mould down, but thankfully I managed to save the bit that was stuck to the wood, and then I just added a little bit of super glue and it seems to have stuck back in place and you can't really tell. So thankfully I think I'll be able to model over that. So yeah, so a little bit of clean work to do with this, but for the most part I'm happy with the outcome. So for the next section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a drill bit or a grinding bit and I'm going to try and smooth these back parts here.
Okay, so for the next part I'm going to go in with a sharp scalpel and I'm going to get rid of that unwanted raised lisp edge that you get when you cast resin. And for the next part we need to go ahead and fix that little indentation in the resin. So some just regular sellotape on the side, and I'm going to go in with some UV resin and I'm going to try and get in there. I'm going to poke around for a tiny little bit of needle just to free up some air bubbles, make sure it sinks nice and flat, and then just go in for UV torch, and then after a good minute of UVing, then it should be nice and dry or nice and hard, and then you, in theory, you shouldn't really be able to tell the difference. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm going to go in with a top-up coat of a nice black and I'm going to fix up those edges.
Okay guys, so for the next part I'm going to go in with some just regular cotton wool. I'm going to PVA glue the bottom and I'm going to put it into the top part of this vent, leave it to dry, and then once dry I'm going to pull away a few strands to make it look like smoke coming out of the vent.
Six and a half hours later.
Okay, so now that that's had time to dry, let's go ahead and take some of the weight and make it look like smoke. So for the next part I went ahead and added some metal pins to the bottom of Pennywise feet, and this is to help pin him and keep him in place on the resin lake. So just going to map out where they need to be drilled, and then just going to take a nice thin drill bit and get drilling. So now that we have our channel holes drilled, for the next stage just regular normal super glue to the rescue. And I'm just going to put them in place, and hopefully this should keep them nice and solid. Okay guys, so for the next part we need to go ahead and start recreating some of these lily pads that's on the floor around Pennywise's feet. And in order to achieve this, a couple of years ago I bought this like decorative garden piece to go on either side of my bench. But as the years roll by, the weather took its toll and some of these artificial leaves have come off and blown away and have scattered all over the garden. So I went around and collected some of these, and I decided to use one of these, which is like a hole puncher in the shape of a circle, and that will make for a great base to start creating some of these lily pads. So without further ado, let's open this bad boy up. Okay guys, in order to make that centre groove cut that all lily pads seem to have, just general scissors to the rescue, and then I'm going to go ahead and fold it in half, and then that just goes a long way to making it look more like a traditional lily pad. So let's get cracking with the rest.
75 years later.
Okay guys, so after collecting a various amount of them, I decided to go ahead and put these on some baking foil, and then I'm going to go over and gently rub on some PVA glue, and then that basically just makes these a little bit thicker and a little bit more usable, and also gives it a little bit of a skin shine that most lily pads seem to have. So I'll just crack on with these now.
2,000 years later.
Okay guys, that took a very long time to do, but I'm finally finished. So I'll go ahead and I'll leave these to dry, and then we can go ahead and put them back in the cellophane bag to use in a moment. Okay guys, so that moment is now come, so I'm going to go in with some Mod Podge gloss, and I'm going to take those lily pads and an airbrush to mimic some little ripples in the water, and we're going to put it all together, and hopefully we can make this look like a murky lake.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay guys, so for the next part I'm going to go ahead and we're going to recreate the famous iconic IT logo to go on the front of the diorama. And what I did was I started off by just getting a screen grab from a Google search, and then I went into Matter Control, and then I uploaded the new image, and then I created like a 3D file, or a 3D STL file, and then I basically just overlapped it onto a rectangle base, and then saved it all as one file, and then we can go ahead and print it off.
3 hours later.
Okay guys, so here it is all printed off, and this is a nice base. So we're going to go ahead and put this in spray booth and give it a nice white prime.
5 minutes later.
Okay guys, so here it is all white primed. So now we can start adding our base colour. So I'm just going to go in with a normal medium red from Vallejo paints, and I'm going to go ahead and give this like 2 or 3 coats. Okay, so now that the red's dry, we're going to go in with a black felt pen, and we're going to add a black square box around the logo. And finally, the last step is to go in with a nice gloss varnish to make sure I get into all surfaces, and then just leave to dry. So now that the logo's painted, let's go ahead and use some regular super glue and stick it in place. So I was thinking that the lake needs a little bit more of a 3D aspect to it. So I went ahead and got these old vines that I've got from a plant years ago, cut the side seedlings off the side to make these rather lovely fetching 3D little mini lily pads. So same again, Mod Podge gloss, and I'm just going to take my time and stick them in between the areas of the normal lily pads, and then this should go a long way to making this look a bit more 3D-ish rather than a 2D like flat surface, and then it also will help blend into that backdrop. Okay guys, so once that's dried, I think this diorama is finished.
Aren't you gonna say hello? Hey, you're gonna like it down here. They all flow down here. Won't do any good to run, girly boy.
Okay guys, so please excuse the hat and the gloves and everything like that. I'm filming this in the middle of December in a freezing cold garage with no heating, so I'm absolutely freezing right now. So I'm going to wrap this up and then get back into the house where it's nice and warm. So anyway, getting back to the build. Here he is, Mr. Pennywise, aka Tim Curry's Pennywise from the TV/movie adaptation to Stephen King's It. And I have to admit, I've really enjoyed working on this one. I did hit a couple of gripes. One of them I filmed but I didn't include in the video, which was basically I tried to recreate the Resin Lake first before I added the foliage. And I tried to use this stuff called easy water, which is basically a resin that you heat up in a pan and then you pour it in a hot liquid state and then you leave it to solidify, cool down, solidify, and then you've got this like murky water look, which would have been perfect for this. But unfortunately, with having to add it in a hot state, it reacted badly with the wooden base. It made the wooden base concave inwards, so that wasn't brilliant. So I had to go ahead and make another base, and then instead of using that, I decided to use just normal clear resin instead. So I used a different resin, so thankfully it worked second time round. But yeah, a few little gripes here and there. The balloons took probably way longer than they needed to take, really. I had to build them up slowly. If I was going to model this again, I would probably tweak a few things. But all in all, I am extremely happy with how it turned out. My only slight gripe is I've tried to model a vast distance behind Pennywise in such a short space. And it's hard to model something that's supposed to be flat in the distance over a 90-degree, you know, L-shaped base. So, but for what it is, it's I think it's turned out rather nice. So I'm happy with it. So yeah, so if you've enjoyed this build, please smash that like button, share it on Facebook and Twitter, because it helps new people find the YouTube channel, which I'm always appreciative. Thank you for any help. If you have any comments, comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future builds. And sometime soon I'm hoping to do the build Skarsgård version of Pennywise in a diorama to go alongside this one. So hopefully you'll come back to revisit that, or if you want to make sure you don't definitely miss out on that, then hit that notification bell. So once again, I'm Francis Gray, and this is Tim Curry's Pennywise from the TV/movie adaptation of Stephen King's It. I'll see you in the next build.